Just because I accidentally broke the clay figurine that the dream lover gave him, my fiancé, who had been engaged to me for many years, threw me into the countryside and left me to fend for myself. A year later, Brian finally remembered me and brought Diana to pick me up. Diana asked, "It took you so long to pick up Sister Ellie. Do you think she will be angry?" Brian laughed disdainfully. "A year is just right. If it was shorter, she would definitely not remember it clearly." Then a sneer appeared on his face. "Ellie is a cheap bastard. He won't feel the pain unless he is beaten well." Just when everyone thought I would cry bitterly and cling to Brian, who appeared again with rain on his face, I just smiled calmly. "I'm sorry, who are you?" A trace of nervousness and uneasiness flashed in Brian's eyes. "Ellie, have you forgotten that I am your fiancé and you're my fiancé? Then why did you throw me in this small country town?" I half leaned on the recliner in the yard. My face looked a little pale, and I was half asleep. I didn't know when the courtyard was filled with cars. After a burst of hurried footsteps, there was also a rustling sound of voices. "Brian, you see the environment here is so bad. Sister Ellie must have had a hard time this year. It's all my fault. We should have come to pick up Sister Ellie earlier. Now I just hope she won't hate me. Diana, I think you are too kind. You let Ellie come here to punish her, not to let her come on vacation. What do you need such a good environment for? And if you hadn't interceded for her and kept thinking about taking her back this year, I would have been ready to leave her here for 3 years." Listening to their words, I didn't need to identify who was coming. I knew who was coming almost instantly. A year ago, because I accidentally broke the clay doll that Diana made for Brian, Brian cruelly threw me into the old house in the countryside. I remember that day was late at night. The old house seemed a little gloomy and scary because no one had lived in it for a long time. I cried and grabbed the corner of Brian's clothes. I begged him not to leave me here alone, but because of Diana's words, he shook off my hand indifferently, his eyes full of disgust. "Ellie, this is your punishment. If you don't learn a lesson, you will never know your mistake." That night, I curled up in the dark old house to spend the most difficult night. Diana's words kept appearing in my mind. "Brian, I made that clay doll for you very carefully." So in his eyes, his fiancée who has been engaged to him for nearly 7 years, am not even as good as a clay doll made by Diana. Thinking of the past year again, a huge resentment kept surging and roaring in my heart. After a while, the sunlight in front of me was covered by a shadow. I heard Brian's cold and ruthless voice again in my ears. "Ellie, you should get up. In view of your good performance this year, I will take you home." I slowly opened my eyes, frowned, and stared at Brian for a long time, questioning him. "Go home? Go back to what home? And who are you, sir?" Brian frowned. He looked at me deeply, a hint of nervousness flashed in his eyes, and his voice subconsciously rose a few degrees. "Ellie, what nonsense are you talking about? I am Brian, your fiancé." I sneered twice. "You are my fiancé, so why did you abandon me in this small country town?" Brian was speechless. Finally, with a dark face, he said impatiently in a calm voice, "Ellie, don't play dumb. I'm here to take you back now." When I heard him say that he would take me home again, I couldn't help feeling sad. It turned out that he still knew that he was my fiancé, but he abandoned me in this old house in this small mountain village for a year and didn't care about me. He hung out with Diana all day long. People who didn't know thought they were a couple. I had quarreled with him because of this before, but Brian still did his own thing and ignored any of my emotions. That day, he accidentally broke the clay doll that Diana had made for him. It was because I had a big quarrel with Brian. We agreed to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau on the day of the wedding, but he actually abandoned me alone because of a phone call from Diana. He said he wanted to eat Nanqing's Bao and he couldn't wait to leave. He didn't even have time to get a certificate. I waited for him at the Civil Affairs Bureau until the staff drove me out. After returning home in a daze, I watched him and Diana being intimate, eating the Bao one bite at a time. At first, he looked at me with some guilt, but when Diana said casually, "The Civil Affairs Bureau is right there, it won't run away. Sister Ellie is so flustered. Is she doing something she feels guilty about?" Brian immediately looked at me righteously, as if he had found a reason, and every word was venting his dissatisfaction with me. "Ellie, you're not young anymore. You know that some things can't be rushed, and you should learn to be sensible. I am usually very busy, unlike you, who do nothing every day. At that time, I replied sarcastically, I was very busy just to buy Xylong Bao for Diana. This sentence was like igniting Brian's explosives. Before I could react, the slap in his hand slapped me in the face. With a snap, my right cheek was burning and painful. I couldn't help but take a few steps back. My left hand hit the shoe cabinet, knocking over Diana's clay doll, which fell to the ground and broke into pieces. It's not that I haven't explained it before, but with that red and swollen face, no matter how hard I tried to explain, Brian didn't believe me. He always thought that I did it on purpose, just to avenge his slap. Now that I think about it, it's just a joke. Obviously, I was the one who was hurt, but in his eyes, I was the perpetrator. I leaned calmly on the recliner without responding to Brian's words. He rushed over in one step, grabbed my arm tightly with a ferocious face. Ellie, I'm talking to you, do you hear me? Diana, who was crying beside her, said, Brian, I think Sister Ellie must be holding a grudge against me, so she pretended not to know you and me. Sister Ellie, can I apologize to you here? As she said this, she was about to bend down to apologize, but the next second, Brian's eyes turned red with anger. He stretched out a hand to support Diana and stopped her from bending over. Diana, your waist injury hasn't healed yet, so don't hurt it again. Then she turned her head and glared at me fiercely. She kept exerting force with her hands, wishing she could break my arm. Ellie, you said you wouldn't talk, so why don't you explain to Diana quickly? But I was indifferent, enduring the pain in my arm and sneering. Diana looked at me resentfully, her waist was half bent, and seeing that I still didn't talk, she could only bend there, neither up nor down. Tears instantly slid down her cheeks. Brian, don't worry about me. Sister Ellie just holds a grudge against me, and if I don't apologize, she won't go back. I've been taking care of you in the Brian family for a year without any status, but I didn't expect to be regarded as a bad person by Sister Ellie. Hearing this, Brian bit his heart and hurt. He looked at me with gnashed teeth, his eyes were violent, and he dragged me from the recliner to the ground without hesitation. My back rubbed against the ground, and he dragged me a few steps, dragging me alive to Diana's feet. Ellie, you are such a jealous woman. If Diana hadn't helped you take care of me this year, I wouldn't be as healthy as I am now. It would be fine if you were not grateful, but you actually want to hate her. I looked at Brian sarcastically. What a joke. He was the one who abandoned me in the old house in the countryside. Now, he blames me for not taking care of him this year and letting him and Diana spend a year of sweet days. He was so happy that he almost forgot about me, his fiancée. Now he thinks of blaming me with this reason. On what basis? In his eyes, no matter what I do, I am wrong. Brian saw my resentment. He grabbed my hand and threw it to the ground. He looked at me angrily, but there was some evasion in his eyes. Ellie, what kind of look is that? With a bang, I finally couldn't help but groan in pain. My wrist hit a small stone on the ground. I couldn't help shaking in pain. My back was also burning and burning. The clothes were rubbed and the blood oozed out of the skin stuck together. Seeing me trembling all over, my whole face wrinkled in discomfort. My already pale face turned bloodless. At this time, Brian finally came to his senses. He rushed forward and prepared to help me up. Ellie, you. What's wrong with you? I didn't expect you to become so weak. Hearing his false concern for a moment, I didn't feel sad, but a faint sense of absurdity. It was obvious that all this was caused by him, and now you are pretending to be affectionate to me? Brian wanted to pick me up and said, Ellie, please bear with it. I will take you home soon and let the doctor check your body. But I suddenly shook off his hand, summoned all my strength, and slowly stood up from the ground. Leaning on the chair behind me, I tried hard to hold back the tears that had already filled my eyes. I said in despair, No, I won't go back with you. My home is here. Please leave now, or I will call the police. Brian was stunned for a moment when he saw the indifferent expression on my face. He was rarely a little flustered. He frowned and was about to speak when Diana behind him took the lead. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. In the corner where only the two of us could see, she showed a vicious look, Sister Ellie, I think you are just pretending to be so weak. Weren't you quite strong when you pushed Brian away just now? As she spoke, she repeated the same trick, and after pulling Brian's arm, she showed a pitiful look. I think Sister Ellie is just dissatisfied with me and wants to deliberately torment me, but it doesn't matter. But if this waist injury recurs, I will have to trouble you to bathe and wipe my body for me every day. Hearing these words and Diana's shy face, even though I knew she was deliberately provoking me, it still stirred up all the emotions in my heart. Brian hurriedly hugged her lovingly and gently supported her waist with his hands. Don't be so stubborn. If the waist injury recurs, you have to stay in bed again. At this time, there was no more brutality in her eyes when facing me, but full of tenderness and affection for Diana. Seeing this scene, even if I had decided to give up Brian, my heart still ached finely. Diana looked at me triumphantly and leaned weakly in his arms, but I didn't apologize. What if Sister Ellie didn't go home? Brian looked up and our eyes met in the air. He subconsciously distanced himself from Diana again and then looked at me disappointedly, with cold and ruthless eyes. Ellie, it's okay if you lied to me. Why do you have to torture Diana? Just looking at my pale face and scars all over my body, my voice had to soften. I suppressed my anger and asked you one last time, will you go home with me? Looking at Brian, who was already extremely suppressing his anger, I suddenly spread my hands and smiled at him. I'm really sorry, mister. Brian, I said my home is here. You haven't been here for a year. Not only am I married, but I also have a child. How can I go back with you? Do you want me to abandon my husband and son just because of you? After I finished speaking, I remembered that my husband and son would be back soon, so I turned around and walked into the house to make milk powder. Brian's eyes had been red without knowing when, and he didn't care about Diana's shouting behind him. He followed me straight into the house. He grabbed my hand angrily and threw me on the sofa. The anger on his face finally couldn't be suppressed and burst out. Ellie, how long are you going to play tricks on me? What are you talking about getting married and having children? Even if you are fooling around, you should know the limit. Do you believe that I will really leave you here and never care about you again? I didn't say a word and crawled on the sofa in pain. My back had just hit the sofa, and the wound that had just clotted blood opened again. The clothes were already stained red with blood. Brian's face showed an uneasy expression. He wanted to go forward, but stopped. He was silent for a long time and spoke again after choosing his words. Ellie, you were obviously not such a petty person before. Why did you become like this now? He shook his head, as if I had done something terrible. I know you don't like Diana and even hate her, but you have to know that during the year you were away, it was thanks to Diana taking care of me. You don't have to complain about Diana. She and I are just simple friends. You are my fiancé, and we are the ones who are going to get married in the end. I endured the severe pain in my body. I finally sat down on the sofa, feeling bitter in my heart. It turned out that Brian had always known that I didn't like Diana, but every time he tortured and humiliated me for Diana. Maybe he didn't even realize it. Now every word he said was to defend his so-called friend Diana. I listened to him finish his last sentence quietly. The sadness in my heart drowned me like the sea. I finally couldn't help but laugh at myself and said, "Believe it? How dare you not believe it? I have been thrown here by you for a year. But Brian, Ellie, am a selfish and narrow-minded person. I will remember it for the rest of my life if anyone treats me badly." As soon as he finished speaking, he couldn't help but pick up the glass on the table and threw it hard at the door behind me. Ellie, are you done yet? The glass fragments splashed all over me. There was a scream outside the door.
Who was it?
Brian turned around impatiently. It was Diana, who came in. Brian, I saw that you didn't come out for so long. I was afraid that something had happened to you. His frown relaxed instantly. It's just that the air in the room suddenly seemed to solidify, and it suddenly became silent. After a while, Diana lowered his head and looked at me resentfully and said dejectedly, Brian, I'll go back first. Since Sister Ellie can't stand me, I'll pack my luggage and leave the Brian family when I go back. Finally, Brian's temper, which had been suppressed for a long time, erupted like a volcano. He didn't care about my weak body and directly grabbed my arm and dragged me outside. His sharp and powerful fingers wanted to pierce deeply into the flesh on my forearm. The pain made tears well up in my eyes. I waved my hand and slapped him in the face. Brian was stunned in an instant, looking at me with disbelief on his face. "Ellie, you actually hit me." From childhood to adulthood, in his eyes, I have always been a person who cares for him. But this time, I was not satisfied and slapped him again. "Mr. Brian, are you sober?" I said. "I'm married and have children. My home is here. Please don't disturb my life." Brian heard this with a sneer on his face. "How many times are you going to say this lie? Get married and have children? Who else but me would marry you and have children?" At this moment, the babbling voices of my husband and child were heard outside the door. "Wife, I'm back." Seeing Jonathan holding the child and pushing open the door, Brian's face showed a look of horror, and his trembling, thin lips asked me, "Ellie, who are they? Why do they call you wife?" I ignored Brian and took 3 or 2 steps forward to take the child from Jonathan's arms. The moment I held the child, the pain in my body seemed to disappear. However, Jonathan still saw the scars all over my body. His face suddenly became gloomy, and he asked me in a cold tone, "Wife, why are there so many people at home? And are the injuries on your body caused by them?" As he spoke, Jonathan looked at Diana and Brian with cold eyes. It was the first time I saw his face so cold. I met Jonathan on the night a year ago, just the day after I was abandoned in the old house by Brian. I tried to walk back to the city, but accidentally got lost in the mountains. The weather was not good, and it rained heavily. I accidentally slipped and rolled down the mountain, hit a tree, and fainted. When I woke up, I was already lying in a small tent. Jonathan was sitting in a corner of the tent, curled up, with the quilt covering me. It was he who saved me. He said that he happened to come to the mountains for camping and adventure and unexpectedly saw me unconscious under a tree, so he rescued me. Later, I invited him back to the old house. Having someone to accompany me reduced my fear, and I lived in the old house with peace of mind. Jonathan seemed to come to this mountain area for adventures frequently. Every time he came, I would let him stay overnight in the old house. Over time, I gradually developed a different relationship with him, and I no longer thought about going back. As for my relationship with Brian, I learned to let go. After 2 months of getting along, when Jonathan and I were climbing a mountain to watch the sunrise, he proposed to me. I thought about it for a long time and finally agreed. We didn't hold a grand wedding and not many people knew about it. But I know that Jonathan truly loves me. I can feel his concerned eyes scanning my body and finally pausing for a long time on the scarlet wound on my back. I smiled at him and said, "Okay, there are still outsiders. We'll talk about this later." But when I just mentioned it, Brian rushed up unwillingly with red eyes and bulging veins on his forehead. He grabbed my hands and asked me, "Ellie, tell me who he is and whose child is this?" As soon as I frowned, Jonathan pushed Brian away. He is not stupid. He has heard of my story, so he naturally guessed who Brian is. Then, considering the injuries on my body, I looked at him coldly with a bad tone. "Mr. Brian, right? I am Ellie's husband. This is our child." I don't know if Mr. Brian is clear enough now. Brian naturally couldn't accept what Jonathan said. His face was distorted and hideous, and his eyes were wide open. "Impossible. Ellie is my fiancée. The only person she loves is me. How could she marry you?" It was just Jonathan's simple words that made Brian stunned. "Since you know that Ellie loves you so much, how did you treat her? How did you treat her?" Brian seemed to become confused. Thinking of how he constantly looked down on me for Diana, and even threw me into this old house in a remote area because of a clay doll, his brain seemed to be hit by a heavy hammer. He gritted his teeth, and his eyes were bloodshot. "This is a matter between Ellie and me. What has it got to do with you? I will naturally give Ellie an explanation for what happened between us." Jonathan sneered and hugged my waist. "Now I am Ellie's husband. Her business is my business. I was not here before, but I will not let you go for what you did to Ellie today." Jonathan's palm would occasionally rub my waist dishonestly, which made me feel a little itchy. I snorted and glared at him. This scene instantly stimulated Brian. His chest kept rising and falling, and he looked at me angrily. At this time, Diana came out from behind and grabbed Brian. The excitement flashing in her eyes could not be concealed. Brian, since Sister Ellie is married and has children, let's not disturb her life. It's a pity that it would have been better if you didn't say this. As soon as she said it, Brian was like a mad bull. He shook off Diana's hand and rushed towards Jonathan, punching him. I was pushed away and stood not far away. The two began to wrestle. Diana tried to persuade them anxiously, but couldn't. So I had to persuade them. Sister Ellie, why don't you persuade them quickly? What if they get hurt accidentally? I didn't say a word. I held the child calmly and teased him with my head down. How could Brian, who sat in the office all day, be the opponent of Jonathan, who often climbed up to exercise? He was beaten to the ground by Jonathan in a few moves. It was not until I saw Brian trembling and unable to stand steadily that I spoke casually. I said it before, and now the facts are in front of you. Brian, please don't come again in the future. I don't want my life to be disturbed by you. After saying that, I carried the child back to the bedroom. Brian looked at my back as I left, his eyes dull. He was unwilling but helpless. In the end, he was kicked out by Jonathan. Late at night, I was lying on the bed in the bedroom. Jonathan wiped the wound on my back with alcohol. This man who had just shown his skills during the day was crying while wiping. It's all my fault. I had to take my son out to play. If I was at home, my wife, you wouldn't be injured. I glanced at him speechlessly. It was me who asked you to take our son out, so you mean to blame me? Jonathan immediately made a bitter face and complained, that's not the case. Ellie, you can't wrongly accuse me like this. It's just because I feel sorry for you. The previous injury has not healed yet, and now I'm injured because of that guy named Brian. It was in that heavy rain that year that I rolled down the mountain and injured my body. I have never recovered. Later, after I became pregnant, although Jonathan took care of me every day, I still coughed and wheezed for more than half a year. 3 months ago, he was hospitalized because of a high fever. In the last 8 months, my son was born prematurely and almost couldn't get off the operating table safely. Thinking of these things, I turned around, smiled, and wiped away the tears from the corners of Jonathan's eyes, then hugged my son and said to him, we haven't been camping for a long time. How about we go camping in the back mountain tomorrow? Jonathan was a little hesitant, but in the end, he couldn't persuade me. Early the next morning, Jonathan prepared a lot of equipment and carried a big bag. I held my son and went out. Unexpectedly, as soon as I came out, a familiar voice sounded behind me. Brian was sitting on the steps outside the yard. After seeing me, he quickly patted the dust on his body, stood up, and walked in front of me. I frowned with a bit of impatience. Looking at Brian, it was obvious that he had been guarding outside all night. His hair was messed up by the wind, and there were still bloodshot in the corners of his eyes. His coat was covered with dew, and most of it was wet. I made it very clear yesterday. I don't know what else you want to talk to me about. Brian smiled bitterly and shook his head. His eyes looked at me affectionately. Ellie, we are engaged. No matter what happens, we should discuss it carefully. You don't have to do this kind of thing with an outsider to irritate me. At this point, he paused for a moment before continuing, but I admit that I was really irritated by you. Ellie, come home with me, and I will treat you well in the future. Hearing this, I couldn't help but sneer and said to him teasingly, you are using this kind of thing to irritate you, Brian. Do you think the whole world has to revolve around you? Do you really think that no one else is willing to marry me except you? This sentence made Brian's face become extremely ugly. He opened his mouth but couldn't say a word. Since he put his face in front of me, I didn't let him go. I have a husband and children now. What else do I need you to do? Make me angry all day long, or let me watch you and Diana being ambiguous every day. Brian pursed his lips, his face was pale, and his heart was shocked. He looked at me in disbelief. My eyes suddenly turned red. Ellie, believe me, Diana and I are really just ordinary friends. Also, I've thought about it all night and figured it out. It doesn't matter if you have a child. I will definitely treat the child as my own. If you still don't believe me, I'll go to the hospital for a vasectomy, and we will treat this child as our only baby in the future. Suddenly, I looked at Brian as if I were a madman. I didn't expect that he could even say such crazy things. But the next second, Jonathan pushed him away. My son has his biological father and doesn't need a second fake father. And don't try to hit on my wife all day long. Be careful. I'll hit on you too and make you lie in bed for half a month. Looking at Jonathan, who was domineering and protecting his wife, I smiled quietly. Brian's face turned pale, and he stood there stiffly. Jonathan, and I didn't pay any attention to him anymore. We turned around and went to the back mountain for camping. When we arrived at the back mountain, the son in my arms kept babbling as if he knew he was going to go out for a trip. Soon the sky darkened. Jonathan also found a campsite and set up a tent. At night it was drizzling. Jonathan and I were sleeping soundly in the tent when we suddenly heard shouting outside. Soon, the sound became clearer and clearer. I knew it was Brian, who came and asked Jonathan to stay in the tent with the child. I took an umbrella and went out. Brian, can you stop bothering me? I've already hidden in the mountains. Are you still not willing to let me go? He was wearing a raincoat and holding a flashlight in his hand. When he saw me, he couldn't stop the surprise on his face. But after hearing what I said, he pursed his lips for a long time and couldn't utter a word. Finally, he drooped his shoulders and said pitifully, "Ellie, I'm just afraid that something will happen to you. It's not safe in the mountains at night, and the rain is getting heavier. There are often mudslides in the mountains. It's very dangerous. Let's go back, okay?" For a moment, I didn't know how to describe the feeling in my heart. The concern that I never thought of before has now appeared ridiculously. Brian, now you know to care about me, but what about a year ago? Ellie, we have been childhood sweethearts. In your heart, I will always be the most important person. I know you must still be angry that I didn't come to see you this year and that you are too close to Diana, right? When I get back, I will chase her away immediately, okay? At this point, Brian rushed up and wanted to hold my hand, but after I dodged him, his whole body seemed to be broken, and even the light in his eyes seemed to dim. Before I could say anything, Diana came up from nowhere and cried and pestered Brian, looking anxious and panicked, and said to him, "Brian, how could you do this? You have already seen my body all over, and you actually want to chase me away?" Hearing this, Brian's face suddenly turned red with anger. He slapped Diana to the ground with a slap, pointed at her, and cursed. "What nonsense are you talking about? I have a fiancé. Can you have some sense of boundaries as a woman? And I've already said that you are just a nanny who takes care of me on behalf of Ellie. You, a nanny, dream of marrying into my Brian family?" After being scolded by Brian, Diana's face changed constantly, her emotions fluctuated violently, and her chest kept rising and falling. Finally, she laughed crazily, pointed at Brian, and said, "Sense of boundaries, Brian. Your sense of boundaries is to bathe and wipe my body. If I hadn't happened to have my period that day, I'm afraid you would have climbed into my bed. Now you pretend to be a gentleman and talk to me about a sense of boundaries. Are you worthy? Have you forgotten how you tortured Ellie because of me a year ago? Now you see Ellie is married, and you know you regret it again?" Brian's face turned pale and blue when he was pointed at and scolded by Diana. He never thought that Diana, who looked gentle and elegant at ordinary times, would have such a crazy side. "Brian, wake up a little. A scumbag like you still dreamed that Ellie would abandon her husband and children and come back to follow you." This sentence was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Brian roared in anger and directly pinched Diana's neck, trying his best. Diana's lips turned gray and his tongue stuck out. "It's all your fault. If you hadn't deliberately instigated me to torture Ellie, how could I have done such a thing?" Just when Diana was about to die, Brian loosened his hand. I had already returned to the tent while they were killing each other. Even if they fought to the death, it had nothing to do with me. It rained all night that night. When I came out of the tent in the morning, the ground was all wet and every step was filled with mud. I didn't want to continue camping anymore, so I prepared to go back with Jonathan. We hadn't walked far when we saw Brian slumped under a big tree 100 meters away. He was soaking wet and leaning against the tree trunk weakly. It was obvious that he had been caught in the rain all night. He looked at me pitifully, trying to gain my sympathy. But I just glanced at him coldly, frowned slightly, and took Jonathan's hand and walked out of the mountain. There was no extra expression or words throughout the whole process. Not long after I left, I heard intermittent and low sobs behind me. He cried so sadly, but I didn't even turn my head. I walked away gradually until I disappeared from Brian's sight. After that day, Brian seemed to have really given up. He knew that I would not forgive him, and he no longer appeared around the old house to disturb my life. Just when my life was going smoothly, about a week later, Brian's parents suddenly came to the old house to find me. "Ellie, please consider that our two families were old friends and persuade Brian to get the operation. We know that Brian has let you down, but I hope you will go to see him for our sake." From the explanation of Brian's father and mother, I learned that Brian had suffered from a serious illness after being caught in the rain that day. He didn't want to have the operation, and he spent the whole day lying in bed in a daze and got into the bad habit of alcoholism. I couldn't stand the pleading of Brian's father and mother, so I decided to go. When I saw Brian again, he was so thin that he looked like a monster. He was too weak to sit up and could only lean on the bed. As soon as I appeared, it was as if his eyes were shining, but it soon dimmed. "Ellie, why are you here?" He raised his hand to cover his face. "I must look very ugly now. You always said I was the most handsome before, but now I dare not face you." I gave him a cold look. Although it was very miserable, I didn't feel the slightest bit in my heart. If it weren't for the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Brian treated me well in the past, I wouldn't be here today at all. It was as if I had completed a task. He spoke directly. "It was your parents who found me and invited me here. Brian, even if you die now, don't think that I will shed another tear for you. You have already let me down. If you want to let more people down, then continue to wait for death." After saying the last sentence, I turned and left, watching Jonathan waiting for me outside the hospital with the child in his arms. The anger in my heart just now calmed down instantly. Looking at the child's little face that was a little red from the sun, I couldn't help but feel distressed. "Why are you taking the child to bask in the sun? Aren't you afraid of getting the child sunburned?" Jonathan handed the child to me and said with a smile, "The hospital said that it is healthy to get more sun exposure. With our child's skin, how can it be so easy to get sunburned?" I left with Jonathan, playing and joking. There was a burning gaze behind me, staring at my back for a long time. In fact, I had always known all this, but I didn't pay any attention to it. Later, Jonathan held a grand wedding for me, and my 3-year-old son attended as our flower boy. When he handed me the red ring box, I felt extremely satisfied at that moment. The happiness I had always wanted was in my hands. In the corner of the banquet, there was a thin man sitting, staring at my figure infatuatedly, with an expression that seemed to be crying and laughing on his face. Not long after giving me a generous gift, he left. From that day on, Brian disappeared from my life. I heard that he went abroad and was busy dealing with company affairs all day long. I was also busy educating my son never to be a man who betrays sincerity.